Hello, I'm Valentin Mandace from Historic Houses of Romania, Case de Epocă, and I would like to speak about Ceausescu's so-called architectural imagination or even aesthetics. If you visit Bucharest and many places in Romania, you see that it's full of what Prince Charles would call carbuncles. The worst of all is the House of the People, which houses today the Romanian Parliament, the second largest building in the world. Why he reached this stage? Why did he do that in a way? What drove him into that? Apart from politics and his conviction that the Marxist ideology as he imagined it would triumph, he also had an architectural imagination, let's put it that way, because without that kind of thing he wouldn't have produced these monstrosities. Let's put it that way again. It's a very intricate subject which needs lots of research, but nevertheless we can mark the stages which ended up with these buildings and destructions of a large part of Bucharest and urban Romania, the villages, for example, his policies were envisaging destroying villages, concentrating them in small urban areas and using the land for agriculture and many other things like this. Ceausescu started quite well his reign because he was a dictator, a communist dictator. He came to power in 1965 and the auspices were quite good. The international one was excellent. There was the détente, the thawing of relations between East and West. Khrushchev and later on Brezhnev were keen to have respect for reciprocal relations with the West, and the same could be said about the West. Only think about Richard Nixon's policies, for example. And Romania experienced a bit of a more liberal environment, if I can put it that way, into the straitjacket of communism. After the very harsh Stalinism of the 1950s and early 60s, came Ceausescu after Gheorghe Dej with these more liberal policies. And what can reflect best this atmosphere than a photograph like this one? Can you see it? It's Ceausescu in 1965, his first year as the leader of communist Romania, visiting Taj Mahal together with his wife Elena and their daughter Zoe. Now all of them are dead. Two of them are shot like dogs, and one of them died tragically because of cancer, following alcohol abuse. That was their destiny. But it started well with this kind of things. Someone to be around Taj Mahal, I haven't had the privilege myself, and to see this architectural wonder, it changes you, it transforms you in a way, it mellows you down. And to end up in something like this is hard to conceive. But let's survey the stages, how he and his wife reached this stage and how they managed to destroy an entire country which is still picking up the pieces after his reign. Ceausescu had a few years, as I said, of nice leadership in which the country was doing quite okay in, as I said, the straitjacket of Marxism of that time, in that kind of geopolitics. But in 1971, that was a very fateful year. He's been invited in that year in 1971 to take two state visits, official visits to China and North Korea. He visited in China the founder of Communist China, Mao Zedong, in 1971, and afterwards, within the same tour, in Korea with the founder of the North Korean state, Kim Il-sung. You have them here. He's been extraordinarily impressed by what they did there, these terrible dictators, Kim Il-sung and Mao Zedong. And basically, in his mind, he wanted to apply those things in Romania. It was crazy to think of a thing like this, even within the communist world, to transfer those ideas from Far East, from China and North Korea to Europe, what was more or less Central Europe. But that was what the crude communists thought, that if they have a kind of blueprint, it can be applied like in a mechanical mechanism, or we have now a software. And immediately after he came back from this tour, he gathered a conference in Mangalia on Romania's coast, Black Sea coast, in 1971, in which he expounded his thesis, the so-called thesis of Mangalia, in which he urged communist Romania to undertake a kind of cultural revolution, to transform itself onto the model of China, Mao Zedong China, or Kim Il-sung, North Korea. It took quite a while for him to do that thing, and probably would have never happened, that kind of transformation, if we wouldn't have had the catastrophic earthquake of 1977. On 4th of March 1977, a 7.2 Richter scale earthquake struck Romania and provoked huge damage in Bucharest. In less than 1 minute, nearly 2,000 people died underneath the debris. This is one of the photographs from that tragedy. I was a witness of the earthquake, being in the primary school, and I remember being at home, not far from Bucharest. We lived for at least a decade in that house. The earthquake came about, and my parents with me and my brother tried to get out of the house. The doors were opening inside, and after more than 10 years of living in that house, they were pushing out. They forgot how to go out, to have an idea how that earthquake has struck and how powerful it is and what damage it provoked. After that earthquake, he had basically an open field and a strong motivation toward the population to undertake a huge project in Bucharest to build up much stronger and earthquake-proof apartment houses for the population. So he embarked himself and his party apparatus to demolish a large part of the town, what used to be called the Uranus Quarter, and he destroyed about 15% of the town, even more than a nuclear strike, I would say. It's amazing that the demolishing which took place there, which obliterated layers of history, former palaces, houses of the people, of normal people who lived there for generations, orchards, all of these things were perpetrated by a Romanian leader. And Bucharest had foreign occupations. We cannot count them how many they had. And it had invasions and so on and so forth. And this destruction was done by a local, a Romanian leader. And all of these housing complexes and the houses of the people slowly started to emerge, starting to be built in 1983. It was not only his imagination, of course, he needed an architect. It was a meeting of minds. A huge project like this, and in general an architectural project which is going to live for generations, is a meeting of minds between the one who orders the project, the proprietor for a house, in this case a dictator, the proprietor of the country in a way, and the architect. And the architect was a young person, about 27 years old when the building started. Anca Petrescu, her name. Absolutely a shameful figure, a terrible person, who basically didn't have architectural imagination. She is not an architect, she's basically a killer. Although she is much revered in today's Romania and has a huge following. She belongs to the generation of architects who didn't learn from their masters. In the 1980s, there was a break in the architectural profession, in the fact that the people, the architects trained in the interwar period, who were top-notch, weren't able to transmit their knowledge to the new generation of architects. Because of biology, they died, most of them, and also because of the ideological setup in which the communist regime, the dictatorship, didn't allow them to transmit their knowledges, and produced people like this. And the Romanian architectural profession is still full of these problems, and even now is still picking up the pieces. So she embarked, with Ceausescu's blessing and approval and huge finances and human resources and dictatorial power, basically she could do everything, in putting up this terrible building, which is today the second largest in the world, and is probably going to be around in form or another, and even in ruins in the next 2,000 years. The result is this. That is how Ceausescu came up from quite an interesting, mellow beginning at Taj Mahal, and ended up with this, the meeting of these two minds. As I said, we are still picking up the pieces, and the entire Romania, after what has happened. The building cost a few $1 billion in the 1980s currency, so you can imagine that impoverished the country, and it's no wonder that he ended up shot dead together with his wife. The architect, Anca Petrescu, also ended up tragically in a quite recent, a few years ago, car accident, as far as I understand. So all of them are dead. And Romania has now a huge problem. It's lack of care about the architectural heritage. The new buildings which are put up, they lack aesthetics in most of them. And my work, for example, in educating the public about the value of the architectural heritage, it's an uphill battle, precisely because these kind of things. I hope that I gave you a good image what has happened in this part of the world, and we'll see each other at the next podcast. Bye-bye.